Welcome to Technomics, a podcast that explores the intersection of technology and the economy. Hosted by Robyn and Jeremy Nelson, Technomics is brought to you by Insight. The host's opinions, while mostly brilliant, are their own.
Hello, hello. This is Technomics. We're calling this one Disruptors, Disrupting the Disrupted, and I have a very special guest today. Our guest is none other than our fearless CEO, Mr. Ken Lamneck. Hello, sir.
Great to be here. Thanks for the time.
Of course, we're so glad you had the time. So we wanted to tackle a pretty meta topic that I think we all love, which is disruption in technology and in life as we know it, because that's where it's expanding to. You have addressed disruption as this new normal. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to those ideas and what your experiences were that find us at a place where we're just in constant evolution?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an exciting time for all of us in the world of technology, because as you said, there's so much disruption that I believe we're just really at the starting point of. And there's so many great examples, as we all know in our everyday lives, where things are being disrupted. And when disruptive tends to have sort of a negative connotation, but I think it's actually very positive, because it's definitely a connotation of moving forward, of changing things, and typically changing for the better. And I think we're seeing a lot of those in everyday life with how Uber is making our lives much simpler, Airbnb is making our lives simpler, but very disruptive if you're the incumbent. If you're that taxi cab driver in New York City with that medallion, you realize that it's not worth as much. Or you're that hotel chain who thought you had such a franchise, and you realize that, geez, you're selling less rooms because there's something very disruptive that's occurring around you. The interesting thing about this disruption is people don't see it coming. Nobody could have possibly imagined those a few years ago. And of course, the enabler of all that is technology. And that, in my mind, it's really just starting to change. And what's interesting is we talk about it from an innovative point of view. And innovation we tend to think of as something brand new that we haven't seen before. Well, really, the key to disruption technology is taking sort of everyday life and it's disrupting it. And that's what the real difference is. So it's not that incredibly innovative. We've been all using cars. We've been using taxi cabs. We've all been going to hotels. But it's a very sort of disruptive way of bringing a new service at very, very good costs and making things so much easier. So great time, and we're just really at the starting cusp of it.
I think it's so fascinating because I look at the things that are coming to bear in technology, and specifically once we recognize that it's a disruption, right? Like initially it's just kind of out there on the fringe, and maybe it's getting a little bit of coverage on a blog or from a website or from a friend who happens to post a lot on Facebook. And all of a sudden everybody is talking about it. And not only is it changing the way we do things in a normal day or maybe on an average business trip or what have you, but it's creating a whole new economy, which is a topic that we've dug into a few times because, like you said, with Uber, right, all of a sudden this long-standing, how long have medallions been around in New York City? I mean, that is a deep-rooted tradition of business to have a medallion to run your taxi in New York City. All of a sudden getting its comeuppance from an iPhone app, an Android app, a Windows app, right? It's that ripple effect moving out and out and out.
Right, and when the disruption is starting to take hold, when you see the reactions of protectionism that start to occur. And you see that where unions start to get together and try to prevent Uber from doing this, that, and the other in certain cities, and even in certain countries. And that's when you know that it's really successful, when they're trying to protect turf. And you just can't protect those economics. And that kind of value and that kind of service, it's going to win out in the long haul. So it's really a fruitless effort. They might deter it for a little bit, but they're never going to win out because it's just a better idea.
So definitely technological Darwinism. There have been some recent articles. There's a great one on Fast Company from this past week about the sharing economy is dead. Great headline. Gonna read that. And what do you think? Do you think it's dead?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting concept. I think many of us have heard of it, where they talked about the fact that, all of us own drills, but we use a drill, that's a power drill. We use a power drill about 12 minutes for our entire life. Why would you all own one? Why wouldn't we do more sharing? So really sort of interesting concept. And they talked about how that now is dead because it really never caught on. which we'd agree with. And there's many other examples of that, as you look at the household, why would you buy a ladder and all those type of things. But what you really found is that the execution of that, I think in that example, really never caught on. But then again, Uber's a sharing economy, Airbnb's a sharing economy, and those are great examples where it isn't dead and it's actually thriving. So I think it was a great headline, but I think in reality, it isn't true, at least from my vantage point, and I think there's so many great examples, and I think there's going to be so many more that we'll see, which I think is encouraging.
To me, the real headline comes about halfway in, where the article reads, "But most of these platforms soon discovered a discomforting incongruity between enthusiasm for the concept and actual use." So this is a real challenge in technology, which is user experience, client experience, right? It's something we talk about a lot, where the idea is great in theory, but the practical application has to be there, and it doesn't exist for everything. It clearly exists for getting from point A to point B, but does it really exist for, a Black & Decker drill?
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. So there'll be many, many concepts that we haven't even thought of where the sharing is going to take off and will create new industries, new things for us that we can't even imagine today. So I think it is about that because it's about efficiency, right? For the fact is that article, like we've discussed, people use their automobiles 2 hours a day. You pay for it 24 hours a day. So Uber's on that concept of saying, why would you buy something so expensive that you use for a very limited time? Why not use something that has much better utility, much better use? I would say another great example is our school system. The concept, the fact that we would build a factory, a school, and we would actually only use it 9 months a year, and then 3 months a year everybody would be on vacation and we wouldn't use that factory, is ridiculous. You wouldn't have a business where you build a factory and you only use it for 9 months out of the 12 months, right? So at some point we'll figure that out and realize that that's a pretty poor utilization of some very scarce resources that should be better utilized. So I think the examples are endless when we can look at the things that we just we pay for, we use, but we don't use to their fullest. There are better alternatives, and I think what we're seeing now with the basis of things that are being disrupted like this, everything's fair game. So that's where I think we're just at the cusp of seeing this disruption continue, and there'll be, like you said, some models that try it and it doesn't work, and other ones that do catch on. But it's going to really be an exciting time, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years.
I'll give you a great example of one because I want to take this towards a service conversation. Uber is a service, Airbnb is a service. They are both thing-oriented, right? You get a car or you get a room for engaging in the service. There's one that I am particularly fond of right now, and it's called Busy Bees Babysitting. Where, my husband and I both work, we have family around, but, occasionally we need a babysitter who isn't grandma, and it's hard to get to know high schoolers when you don't have one in your life, although I think Jeremy has high schoolers, and I may hit you up one of these days. But Busy Bees is this neighborhood-based application, and I can, within an hour's notice, if I'm in a real emergency, locate a background-checked, CPR-certified, Busy Bees trained babysitter to come and watch my precious little Rugrats, and all it takes is the click of a button. That's disruptive. That is a real tough disruption. Actually, maybe it's not, because the generational aspect to this of a high schooler being able to engage their services through an app in a way that they probably couldn't have before is probably extremely natural to them.
Yeah, and I think you just take that idea and extend it to what about the elderly people who need potential assistance, not full-time, but they just need someone that can come and check on them every day, right? If you've got an elderly parent that doesn't live in the same town you are, you'd want somebody to at least check in on them. Perfect example where they could extend that service to not only babysitting, but why not, potentially serving, people that are maybe the aged and that don't get out as much, or they run errands for them, or they go to the grocery store for them, or whatever. So, yeah, those same applications are going to be far more prevalent in so many aspects of our lives.
I'm really excited about what they will do and how they will watch over my children in the future, or how they will watch over me in the future, as the case may be. We're going to take a quick break here before we get into the software and hardware side of this discussion, because you can't do one without the other, but we're going to ask Ken why. Thank you for sticking with Technomics. Today's guest is Ken Lamneck, and we are talking about disruption. We've talked about disruption in terms of a broader economy as a bigger ideal that we are all being pursued by or enveloped in our daily lives. I want to take a look at how hardware and software are influencing each other. There seem to be two really big areas of opportunity, and that is innovation in hardware and innovation in software. And they always seem to be competing for who's the leader in the current economy. So who do you think is going to win that race?
Yeah, I think it's both, right? You need both of them. So we constantly talk about this digital world that we live in, and everything's digital, but we all know we interface with the world in an analog way. So you do need both, right? You do need the computer that you're using. Of course, the real value in that computer is the software, right? Those applications that are running, all the different aspects. But the device itself becomes pretty key, right? Without that device, it's very difficult. The world isn't completely Siri at this point in time, right? You do need physical devices that we interface with, whether it be an automobile, a smartphone, or whatever. So the physical devices are extremely important and relevant, and I think always will be. The value, it's interesting, the value, of course, has always been more towards the software side. And I think if you looked at example of a great company called, Cisco, that we all know and love, is Cisco a hardware company, a software company? I think we'd all say that they sell a tremendous amount of software through this appliance type of device, maybe called a switch or a router, but there's tremendous amount of software that really is what differentiates them as a company. So you do need that physical aspects. And are there software-defined this and that are coming downstream, and can that be run on a server versus maybe their specific appliance? Yeah, very possible. But that doesn't mean that Cisco, as an example, is disintermediated by that, because they have some of that key architectural software that is necessary. So their model may shift and may change to some degree, but again, software's always been at the root of what they really provide there. I think the other interesting thing to watch, of course, is what's going on with the Internet of Things, which I think is, really an interesting concept and ideas that's just in the early stages of development. But again, those are physical devices that are going to have a big impact. So that's hardware related. What's interesting in the hardware world is it's good and bad, but the hardware world is really, in many cases, why it's not as attractive as an industry is it's been commoditized. So there's less profits. So if you looked at somebody who makes a desktop and notebook computer, those margins for an HP, a Dell, or Lenovo are far, far less than somebody who's making some very differentiated, unique hardware like Cisco from a switch and router point of view. Again, more and more of that software content. But that commoditization also is what makes those devices so prevalent, because they become so available to the masses. Because it wasn't too long ago that a good laptop was $3,000, right? Wow. Now you can get laptops for $200, $400. So that commoditization effect, of course, has made them so much more prevalent. So I don't think you could just say it's one without the other. I think it's, again, we interface with the world in an analog setting. So there's always going to be a need for hardware, maybe not exactly as we know it today, but the houses we live in, the automobiles we drive in, the way we deal with the world has an analog piece to it, and that typically means that there'll be some hardware type of device that'll be necessary.
I think the point about commoditization is a really important one, because even in the hardware space, and especially with the Internet of Things, that area has become a disruptor because of something that got disrupted, and that's 3D printing. You're seeing a lot more. There's even 3D printed cars. They're here in Phoenix, Local Motors. This stuff is cool. I mean, like literally, Ken, you could go in and say, I don't think I want this sedan. Could you just print me up a sports car? And a few days later, they print you a car.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
It's shocking. And I think that the great point of that is when 3D printing really kind of came on the scene, it was sort of like small scale, and there were really practical, but literally small, not car-sized ideas like printing prescriptions, 3D printing arms for people in
war-torn countries and
Thank you.
limbs and so forth. Yeah, they're
I was
just
gonna try and
very
get the
inexpensively.
location right.
Yeah,
I didn't
open
have to look it
sourced.
wrong.
The point where I think the case we looked at where somebody lost an arm in like Syria, and unfortunately that's a $40,000 type of expense, and of course they're very customized because your arm grows, so it's not a one-time expense for a child. And through open source and 3D printing, for a few $100s, some college students were able to actually create a limb for an individual. So that opens it up to the world, and that's just phenomenal. And they're talking about 3D printing for organs now, right? We're literally on the biology side, they'll take cells and they'll be able to actually print and manufacture, well beyond my full understanding, but literally manufacture organs that people need for transplants. So,
Wow.
It's sort of limitless of what, and is that going to be here tomorrow? Of course not, but just the concept that people are actually thinking about and working on it towards it, we know that it's possible, we know that it'll happen. So that really is life-changing.
It's such a beautiful illustration of the possibilities, right? That's, I think, something that we all love being in technology for, is you just don't know what is coming next. Or if you can imagine it, you can pursue it. And the reality of those things coming to bear is better than ever. Which brings us to probably one of the more fun points, which is there's even innovation in things like fashion. You have this biomimicry trend that was walking down the catwalk this week.
I think you need to explain that a little bit more. What is that?
Biomimicry is getting technology to mimic the human environment or the physical environment. So the great example is, let me get her name right, Becca McCharron, and she has some followers the likes of Beyonce, Madonna, and Nicki Minaj. So they're all risk takers, but they created this whole fashion line with Intel, and it called Chromat, and they created these dresses that respond to the body. So literally, as the model walks out onto the catwalk, they have an adrenaline rush because there's thousands of people, and there's Victoria Beckham, and there's Anna Wintour, and they're feeling really nervous when they see her because she's got her glasses on and they don't know what she's thinking. And then that adrenaline rush causes this dress to expand in a very porcupine-like fashion to a number of points. So it is literally reacting to the model's body, which is fascinating.
Yeah, so I think it just shows you that anything's possible, right? Because that's part of technology I didn't think would arrive that soon, but again, anything's possible.
Well, it's the thing that they always say about fashion is that it's fantasy, and technology and fashion share that, right? I mean, there's a fantasy element to it. It's, as you said, it's limitless.
Yeah, and it's exciting because I think you are seeing that technology is becoming cool, and you're starting to see a lot of companies, of course, bring more fashion into technology. Of course, Apple probably being the most trendy to do that with the Apple Watch and the types of things that they're doing, and many companies are working on that. The design that Microsoft's put together with the Surface, all those things very sort of cool looking and appealing, and not just functional.
Even Internet of
devices.
Things, right? I mean, I would like a Nest thermostat in my house simply because it looks cool. The more elegance we attach to the ability to use technology, the greater the adoption, right? The appeal has to be there. And I think the other part of that, which brings us kind of full circle to the original conversation about disruption, is there are these great concepts in theory, but the authenticity and the adoption has to be there in order for it to not just be about enthusiasm, but have an application for actual use. To what extent there will be a use for porcupine dresses, I don't really know, but again, as we have also mentioned, we're not sure what the future use case for that might be.
Yeah, or what the adaptation is of that. And that's what's really interesting when you look at technologies that were geared towards this, and all of a sudden that didn't take off, but people figured out an offshoot of that that really takes off. So it'll be interesting to watch those trends and see what really occurs. And as we discuss, of course, the ones that are interesting to me is that sort of technology that's into wearable devices for athletes and what they're able to do and enhance their performance and put it on their bodies, in their shoes, to really give them instantaneous feedback, to really help their ultimate performance, just unlimited, type of applications for it.
It seems like the NFL would have a real opportunity to apply this to prevent injury.
Yeah, and you're seeing it. I know we had here in Phoenix, we had one of the people associated with the organization talk to us about the fact where they were actually talking and using this technology and using all the big data and analytics with their athletes and bringing it actually down to the point where it made sense for that athlete. So they could basically say, when you perform at your optimum level, and we can test where your optimum level is, do you know what that means? That actually means 2 points more a game. And you know what 2 points more a game means to you from a salary point of view in the NBA? So they were literally able to get it down to dollars and cents to say, this is why we want you to hustle. This is real dollars for you. If you average 2 points more a game, that actually gives you X hundreds of thousands of dollars more per year in income. So they're taking the practicality of that, where they're saying, this is why we're measuring you for your benefit and to make sure we don't overextend you either. So we know that. So pretty interesting applications where, initially athletes didn't want any part of it. But now they're really starting to say, okay, it's not just Big Brother monitoring me. This is real important because it goes in my pocket. So
it's fascinating. I am a word girl. I use words like triumvirate and superfluous. So the fact that I have made the turn and gotten so into numbers and I'm utterly enchanted by ideas like that is just, that's the power of technology. You can turn a wordsmith into a numbers geek because it can tell a story. I think that's the bottom line for me. I like a good story. Well, I think we've been telling a very interesting story about disruption, and Ken, we're very happy to have had you helping to narrate this chapter, and we'll hope you'll come back to join us on Technomics again.
I'd love to.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find all of our shows on iTunes. Join us next time for another episode of Technomics.